And
Peter's feed.
Yep, we're getting it right there. I can't do it all at the same time. So we do have Peter Atkinson, but let me.
Yep.
Here we go. You are Skype user with your name. Look at that. There we go. There we go.
Stretch though.
Yeah, I will fix that because you actually know what you're doing, and I don't have to resize you like I do for everybody else.
That's an accident.
Oh, that's funny.
But it's an interesting, makes him, I like this perspective. It's kind of a...
Do you now?
It's just,
That makes
it's very...
one of us.
Yeah, it's very like sci-fi looking. I don't know how to explain it. There we go.
Yeah, let me get him. Now it's his real... There we go.
Hello, Peter.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
I should just say joining me because when you advertised to people, you said you got to talk to me and then these other guys will be here. So.
We're just hanging out.
We're just some random people that she knows.
I don't know why we're even allowed in the room.
Oh, all right. So enough of our internal squabbles. This is Peter Atkinson, founder of Wizards of the Coast and many other things since then. And thank you for joining us for what we're calling our Kickstarter ending live stream extravaganza day 1 TM.
I am delighted to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, of course. Brian, would you like to start us off with delving into the vaults, or shall we just chat and say how's things going, Peter?
Yeah,
I'm great. How are you?
We're frazzled. Frazzled.
We're good.
Yeah, I'm just relaxed. Like you guys are doing all the tech. I just have to look pretty. I mean,
that's your job.
It's easy.
Show up and look pretty.
That's awesome.
Peter, all right, we're going to ask some questions so we can see like professionals that we are.
Yeah.
We're about to hit Magic's 30th anniversary.
Wow.
I mean,
let that sink in for a minute.
Right. Here's this thing that when you started it, did you think we'd even be discussing a 10-year anniversary, much less a 30-year anniversary?
I mean, given some of my shenanigans, I didn't even think I would live this long. Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, to hit 30th anniversary, I mean, every game eventually hits a 30th anniversary, but for people to still want to talk about it, right? Yeah. I mean, to have a game that you publish that people want to celebrate its 30th anniversary, that's pretty amazing. Congratulations, Richard.
With the Gen Con Cup. I like that.
That's the thing. You know, games come out all the time and games disappear all the time. But what Richard came up with, and then the company that you guys formed, and the growth of this game and development really gave it legs. I know leading up to the moment when Magic's released, it was just cross your fingers, fly to the end. Was there a moment when you said, okay, wait a minute, this might be something special. This might be something that we'll be back at Gen Con next year.
Yeah, I think most of that question of whether or not it would be special, like whether it would be a hit, if you will, most of that occurred, I think, during the 2 years leading up to the release of Gen Con, release of Magic at Gen Con. Right. So that was always the question, because it was weird how many people we would show it to, especially gaming industry people, who, with the exception of Mark Reinhagen, pretty much unanimously weren't impressed, right? Bizarre. I always have a special fond place in my heart for Mark Reinhagen, because he was like, "Oh wow, this is cool. You're gonna be bigger than White Wolf," and I'm like, "No." He's like, "Yeah, you're gonna be way bigger." So there was, because of that, there was always a little bit of hesitancy, and just because of how weird it was, how different, and that, you hope it will. And there's signs along the way, like, when we got the playtest decks from Richard and the productivity office in the basement of my house, it just stopped for like 2 weeks because everybody's playing Magic. And so that kind of gets you go, So so all that was before. Then once Magic came out, seeing the initial response, it was clear it was going to be something. Then
Right.
then it was all the matter of how big, and would there be competitors that would supplant us, and would there be a big bubble? How long would it last? All those types of questions. But we question ourselves all the time. I think anybody that is in publishing, you're always wondering, is this any freaking good? I don't know.
It's had such an impact. It transformed gaming in the sense that everything up to that point is role-playing games. Everything after that point, there were board games. We didn't think of. It really felt like we hadn't seen that wave of board game
games.
playing that we see now. You know what I mean? Role-playing games were kind of dominating this kind of geek culture level of gaming. I'm not talking about the Milton Bradley stuff or whatever.
Right.
But after Magic came out, it wasn't long before everybody was looking for their own card game. You had D&D, you mentioned White Wolf earlier. Could you understand Magic's place in that like sort of zeitgeist moment, that shift that was going on? Could you understand that this is something you guys were propelling?
Yeah, we understood immediately that it was it was a new category. The idea of a trading card game didn't fit in any of the boxes, and I'm going to correct you and add miniatures was definitely a big thing. Games Workshop.
The miniatures were part of D&D.
No,
No.
I think of Warhammer.
Yeah,
Warhammer.
Yeah,
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. Got to think international.
No. I was thinking when I think of
International.
miniatures, I think of
D&D
Yeah, no,
miniatures.
Grenadier stuff and whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah. Good point. Miniatures. Yep.
You had historical miniatures, and you had and I think by this time we were seeing what Games Workshop was doing with Warhammer. It's kind of is separate from historical miniatures.
Sure.
With role-playing games and board games. So, looking at the landscape in that way, we certainly believed that Magic the Gathering was going to create a new category of games and we called it trading card games. The press kind of changed it to collectible card games, but I insist trading card games. That was what we wanted to call it. And that ended up being the case.
But did you recognize your positioning within that? I mean, it's one thing to start it, but when did you sort of come to understand that this was something that, I mean, look, we had all these games that were coming up and then sort of falling by the wayside. We're talking about Magic today. We're not talking about 50 different games today. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think we certainly had the intention of dominating the category from the very beginning, which is why we came up with the Deckmaster brand. It's why we had other trading card games that we released, because perhaps one of the biggest, I don't know if it's so much a mistake, but certainly one of the misunderstandings we had is that we thought that Magic would get replaced effectively. Like, the first time you do this type of game, somebody else is going to come along and do it better. Turns out nobody has. I mean, if I could be that bold to say it, I think the Magic, there was just something magical about Magic, and it just to this day, nobody's really been able to produce a trading card game that is like, oh, this is obviously better than Magic, or arguably better, So we wanted to dominate the category, so we went after licenses, which, for the size we were in 1992, these seemed like big licenses. Like, oh, we got the Netrunner license, we got the like Vampire license, and they're all excellent properties. But it turned out that one could argue that maybe we should have just done Magic and nothing else.
I mean, you got to spread your wings and fly, right? You got to try different things. You got to do what the heart says you're going to do. So I'm glad.
And you get into this business to make games, and so as soon as you stop making, not to jump ahead in the story, but people often ask me, why did you leave Hasbro? I didn't leave Wizards. I left Hasbro, and so it was like well, Wizards got so big that we didn't at the time I left, we didn't have any sort of feasible strategy for making new games. The only thing that made sense to do was more expansions for Magic, Pokemon, and D&D. That's all that made sense, right? So Richard come in, bless his heart, I got this new board game. We're like, okay, the amount it's gonna sell, unfortunately, is gonna be a rounding error. I can make more money sending our head of sales down to Walmart an extra time. I mean, and that's not very fun if you got into this business of games,
Yeah, I mean, I still have a whole big box of my Jihad. I'm sorry, Vampire the Eternal Struggle cards. I still have a whole box of Netrunner cards, and we break them out every now and again and play. So I'm glad you did that. Like,
yeah, I as a gamer, I'm glad too. And I didn't say we shouldn't have done that. I said one could argue that one could make a business case that the day Magic came out, we should have just not done anything else until we got Pokemon.
But is that a trap that you have to fall into? You know, you said, you know, Richard comes out with a new game and you're like, well, we could make more money just sending our sales rep to Walmart.
Yeah.
But why not put out the game necessarily? You know what I mean? Like,
that's what I used to say. I said, well, who cares? I mean, you know, more times at bat, you never know. You're going to give me another home run, right? So, of course, that's what I said, and I still would say that. With the hypothetical person I'm arguing against would say, yeah, but you know, focus of energy and stuff like that. You know, if incremental effort and the ROI in this incremental effort put on Magic is to be higher than the ROI of the incremental effort put on some other game. Blah 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 blah. Okay, get that guy out of here.
So I have a question for you. So I am in the business world, you know, myself. That is separate from the film production that I do, and obviously Seth is in the business world himself, and besides all of our geeky side projects that we do. But so you say you wanted to make games, and I know that you went and got your MBA.
Yeah.
And intentionally, you know, when you started Wizards of the Coast, you're like, I'm going to get my MBA to be a better business person.
Right. Sure.
And obviously that helped you in getting Magic off the ground and everything else. So at what point, you know, you said you left Hasbro, not Wizards. Is there a line for you where, you know, while you're good at business and enjoy business, like it gets too businessy for you? And that's why you're like, okay, maybe I need to start, you know, at the startup level again and kind of work my way up because that's more fun.
Yeah, I think I like running a business. I do like the businessy piece of it.
Yeah.
And I think it's okay to like certain parts of the business better than other parts, and to like you can, if the company is making, let's say Wizards of the Coast in 2001 has a great strategy for producing a whole line of board games, you know, 2 or 3, 4 new board games a year and some new RPGs outside of D&D and stuff like that. If we could have articulated a strategy for doing that, then I wouldn't have to personally be the one doing it, but I could feel really good about the company. Like, here, we made this game. I go down in R&D and try and play well enough that they at least have to be sober while they play me, and they're going to beat me. So, you know, so it's not that I'm doing the game design. It's that I want the company to be doing something that I really enjoy. And so, you know, and I think to part B of the question, like the one part of business that I decided I really don't like to do this anymore is I don't like raising money.
That's a hard part.
Yeah.
And we're doing it right now on a
I'd say add that to the filmmaking side of things too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, raising money, raising rounds of funding, and
I mean, you're a professional beggar. It's awful. It's terrible.
Yeah, it's not fun. I was good at it. I went out and raised money. I did it for Wizards. I did it for Hidden City Games, and you know. But I didn't really enjoy that. I mean, I hated it, to be honest. It's a nice way of putting it. And so, like in my film business now, like, I could probably go out and raise money and do a feature film, and then but that had 2 problems. You'd have the raise money problem, and then you'd have to go to all the festivals afterwards and figure out how to place it. You know.
Oh God.
I mean, I just don't. Neither one of those things sound interesting to me. So I'll keep doing the campy, low budget stuff I'm doing, which is a hell of a lot of fun, and you know, that's what I'm doing.
Well,
I totally get. I mean, we obviously understand that sentiment. It is, you know, half of it is show business, and so you have to, you know, at least be somewhat willing to deal with the business part if you're going to do certain levels of things, like you're saying. Right. But if you're happy just making content, then you stay with the campy low budget, and that's what makes you happy. Exactly.
Yeah, that's fine.
I love that you called it campy, though. Like, it's not
campy.
I'm not sure that's the right
word. Hold on,
word
before we dive into it, Peter, tell us what you're working on now, because we know, because we've been talking to you. But let everybody else know.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I had this fun thing called Actoroki, and I had 2 things: Actoroki and Gen Con TV. And awesome thing for me anyway is that these two things overlap. So Gen Con TV is I'm one of the owners of Gen Con, and so but Gen Con TV is the Twitch channel for Gen Con, and I'm hands-on executive producer for that channel. So I'm out working with producers to create content on the channel, and that's a lot of fun. And then one of the shows on that channel is a show that I'm producing personally called Actoroki, and we call it Turning RPGs into Movies. And so what we do is we stream role-playing game sessions, and then we write screenplay adaptation of the story created at the table, and then we hire actors to act out the story against a green screen. We edit that together into a movie, and then we play it. We add sound effects and art. It's against a green screen, so we key out all the green, put in fantasy art and stuff like that. Sure. And from the story being created at a role-playing game table to the movie is 2 weeks. Wow, 2 weeks. That's insane. I mean, that's crazy. Mm-hmm. So it is. I love that because it does keep the budget in line because you just don't have time to spend more money.
Right.
So it's like, wait.
And I know you do all the editing yourself.
I do the edit. I have Steve has started to do cinematics editing or special effects editing. So but I do the cutting up the footage, putting it in a timeline, keying out the stuff. I do all the boring stuff of just like creating. Actually, I like it. I shouldn't call it boring.
It is. I'm an editor. I enjoy it too.
Yeah. So I'm doing with Premiere and After Effects and learning how to do it. It's a lot of fun. So so I'm doing that. I have a studio in West Seattle where we film things. So it's cool to have a warehouse, I guess.
It's a great warehouse.
Unless they're paving the street behind the warehouse. It's a great warehouse.
That was an unlucky day. For everyone watching, Peter let us do some interviews at his studio. We thought this will be awesome. Some of his old sets are still up, so this cool fantasy kind of setting. And we sit down with the first person we were going to interview, and all of a sudden we hear this like grinding noise. It turns out behind the studio they were tearing up the street to repave it or whatever. We go out there and talk to them. They're like, "Oh, we won't be long. It's only about 10 hours." We're like,
oh my God.
So not the best moment.
Sometimes you get what you pay for.
That's right. That's right.
So I'm gonna have to tie this back to the movie we did before this one, and our Errol Otis interview where someone was outside chainsawing down a tree and they refused to stop. So I had to spend probably $200 to just wait an hour. So it took me a full day to edit about 60 seconds of dialogue to make sure you couldn't hear that chainsaw.
Wow.
We decided not to do it again this time.
Made an Easter egg.
Yeah, we just moved the shoot somewhere else. Your studio facility is pretty awesome, though, Peter.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about putting that together. I mean, it's a warehouse from the outside, but inside it's Hollywood.
Yeah. Well, it's like most studios, it's a warehouse. But so we built a sound wall because the first thing that happened is we got the studio. Originally, it was like, okay, we'll build sets here and then take the set over to like an actual studio, and that's where we'll record because the first thing is the sound people are always like, oh no, we can't do it here because it's too noisy, blah blah blah, right? And so because of the sound people. Hi, Seth. We go to, the first film that we did, we filmed it in over at Sale Griffin Lighting, I think, SGO. Yeah. So, but then it's like the studio rental's really expensive, and it's you're renting it whether you're shooting or not. So you're renting it for the days it takes you to set up the set after you've built it, and then taking it down, moved it there, set up stuff like that. Anyway, so it's like, okay, So I hired an engineer to come in, an acoustics engineer, and say, look, is there like an 80? I'm a big believer in the 80-20 rule. Like you fix 20% of a problem, you fix 80% of that problem. I mean, this is a universal constant. I'm convinced. Anyway, so I hired this engineer and said, what's the 80-20 rule here? What's the work I could do to reduce my sound pollution here? And he told me, well, just build a sound wall here. It's all coming in through those windows and that roll-up door off the street. And so we built a sound wall, and then the next film shoot, sound guy wasn't thrilled, but he said, yeah, this is way better. And we did a shoot. It sounded great to me. So we've done every shoot since inside
noise
the studio.
removal in Premiere. Yeah.
Oh, God, you guys are killing me. You're just killing me.
No, just shut your ears, Seth. Just shut your ears.
It's really impressive what you put together, Peter. I mean, when we walked in the first time and saw it, I remember just our eyes were wide. So with the whole set build and everything,
was amazing.
Yeah.
What teams are you working with to make those sets and things that you're doing?
Yeah, so there's 4 people we've worked with who in Seattle's Layla and Jordan. They don't have a company. I just hired them contract once in a while for building sets and doing set decoration and design. And then I hired Bandersnatch, which is a practical effects company here in Seattle, to do in-camera effects. And they're co-located with us. And so, that's them. They're the go-to company in Seattle if you want practical effects.
Nice.
Cool.
I think it's cool that your project, the stuff you're doing now still connects to gaming. You know, like you didn't just say, okay, I was done with that, time to move on. You're still drawing inspiration from games to create the movies and to put these projects out there. Tell me a little bit about your history with gaming. I mean, pre-Magic, what got you from, like, even into this position where you want to start a gaming company?
Yeah, I've been pretty fanatical about games for a long time. My family played games. I grew up playing games on a farm, just normal family type games, but that was part of the culture. And then my dad, he was in the military, and so we got introduced to, the old Avalon Hill SPI types of board war games, with a big hexagonal grid, with cardboard chits you move around and, be the first kid on your block to control the world, that sort of thing. And so we played a lot of those, and then I in 1978 I discovered Dungeons and Dragons, and just fell in love with role playing games. I discovered fantasy. My brother gave me The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. So and I also went through a historical miniatures phase. So I mean, I've played I just love the game experience, the experience that comes from tabletop games.
Right.
It's deeper, it's richer, it's a lot of fun. But role-playing games, and of course eventually Magic the Gathering, and played a lot of Magic in the 90s.
Oh yeah.
And still play it from now every now and then too these days. So I've just enjoyed every aspect of tabletop games, and so, but I think role-playing games is kind of my my first love. I mean, third love, but first place love. There you go.
So I've got a question for you, and I'm sorry I didn't ask it in your formal interview, right? Did you guys ever sit around and say, how do we work more role-playing into Magic the Gathering? How do we make this game more in a way where we're taking on more of the roles, where we're not just sitting behind the cards, where we're... Did you ever think about that or try to work that in, or discard it?
No, not really. I mean, we talked about it. I mean, you're certainly at its most gross level, there's role playing in the sense of, you're taking on the role of this wizard as you play this game. Right. Just like there is in a board game, and you're playing diplomacy, that's actually can be fairly close to a role playing game in certain ways.
Sure.
John Peterson talks about it a lot in his book. And so, but I think it was very clear right from the beginning. No, this is a card game. And if anything, we took it a step away from role-playing when we came out with the organized play program and emphasized competitive play, where before that, we weren't particularly emphasizing anything. We were just saying, hey, here's this cool game. And what the market decided to emphasize was the resellability, the price gouging and all that sort of stuff, speculating on the cards, that sort of stuff like that. So there were certainly people that were fans of Magic in the earliest days who did not like the way we moved Magic more towards competitive play because they preferred a more casual, and I'm circle that back to role-playing, the idea of playing a deck which has a certain type of vibe to it, a certain type of feel, the squirrel deck.
Right.
Squirrel first.
Everybody likes squirrels,
Yeah. So there is... but I'm hesitant to call that role playing. I think it's more like theming, Yeah.
We have friends who, and one that we interviewed for the documentary as just a casual player. We have a friend who names his decks after, he comes up with creative names for all of his commander decks. and he has like 100 different commander decks, and they all have a special theme and name, and like, and he gets into, he has a spreadsheet of them, like it's crazy. Like, it always amazes me with Magic, particularly more than any other game that I've ever seen. People want to personalize it to themselves. Like it's very much an extension of them. I mean, Dungeons and Dragons, of course, and role-playing games can be your character is an extension of yourself, literally, in a lot of cases. But I mean, like it with the pieces of the game, like they're actually an extension of the person's personality. It's like an accessory to them as opposed to just a game. It's like a fashion.
But you can kind of see how that might work against competitive play, though. Like if you have a theme and say, well, you really should take this card out and put in this card. Yeah, but that doesn't fit the theme. My commander would never use that spell.
Right. Which is, I think
that doesn't have a bushy tail.
I think that's what's so great about Magic is that it can be that competitive game where it's about strategy and the win, and then for other people it's just literally about how many squirrels they can get into their deck.
That's right.
And they're completely fine.
That's fabulous. That's awesome. Yeah.
When you were sitting around then, in those earliest days of Magic, when you're within, call it like the first year before organized play, what sort of, like, how did you approach your deck? Like, were you thinking in terms of themes? Were you thinking of, this is what I can do to just make sure I beat Lisa Stevens into submission?
No, he was putting as many lotuses as he could in his deck. That's what he was doing.
Right.
Yeah, well, it depends on which deck. But yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
I think it wasn't so much themes, although it was more like, oh, it would really be kind of funny if you had a wall of fire or, wall of water and put fire breathing on it and use the jump spell on it. I mean, sometimes it was more just appreciating the silly combinations of things that come out. No, if you're going to play Magic, I always played it. It's about strategy. It's like, okay, what's the winning combo here? And I always generally played limited formats. Once I created a one-turn kill deck, then where do you go from there? Okay, so let's play limited form. I liked our office leagues the most. We had a succession of a series of office leagues in the company that were just a lot of fun, where we would play for Annie. Everybody'd start with a deck and a couple booster packs, and you build your card and you play your deck. I mean, you play with other people in mostly R&D guys, but John from International Business was in it, and Brian, the lawyer, was in it. I mean, it was, and then you play for Annie, and you keep track of, like, you'd sign the card when you lost it, and so eventually the league, after 3 or 4 weeks, would degenerate into like, okay, usually Richard has like a crazy powerful deck that wins everybody. Okay, he's the winner. Now start again.
Right. Lisa was telling us, she was showing us actually the decks that she would use. I guess you guys at, I think this was at Gen Con, but it might have been at some other event where you could go up and play against people who worked at Wizards.
Right.
Still for ante, which is really
gunslinging. Yeah. We call it gunslinging. Man. Yeah.
Did you ever play in any of those? Could
my
people
God,
come up and play against you?
Oh yeah. I played I think the hottest I ever, like temperature-wise, I played in Brazil in summer outside in a suit all day.
Why?
Yeah.
I don't know. Just, I'm from a farm. We just sometimes we do crazy physical things to just like prove our manliness. I mean,
oh, good. By melting.
Yeah, by melting. I can do it. Yeah, I'm fine. Just bring me more guarana. I'll be okay.
Did you ever play in one of those games and have someone just come up and just mop the floor with you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, for sure. You're playing random people, so
right.
I had a chance of winning. But yeah, sometimes you run into some. I mean, Magic. A lot of it's the luck of the draw too, and like what decks are you playing? I mean, it's easy to lose at Magic, So yeah, I won and lost.
I lose all the time. It's really easy to lose in Magic. Trust me.
Yeah.
That's my default state. I
wanted to ask a question about. You mentioned earlier, some people comments about the push towards competitive Magic. What drove that decision?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. That was a direct response to Fallen Empires, and so the debacle that we ended up in at the end of 1994, going into 95, where we finally got our printing capacity caught up with demand, and then some.
Well, people were lying to you, apparently, from what I understand. Like the distributors were lying, saying, "I want this much," thinking they'd only get a tenth of it.
That's harsh language. But everybody was doing it. It was padding the numbers might be a nicer way of saying it. So what we had is we trained the entire industry to overorder, and we trained at several levels. I mean, through the original Magic and Arabian Nights and the Dark and Legend. I can't even get the order right. Arabian Nights, jeez.
Okay.
30
Legends
years.
is in there somewhere. Anyway, all those early sets that predate Fallen Empires, I can't believe it. Anyway, each time we did one of these sets, people wanted way more than what we could give them, and so people upped their order because we would allocate it and order less. So distributors who might need, let's say, I don't know, 50 pallets or whatever, right? Just 50, let's say, would order 100, okay, because of that. But now they had trained their retailers to do the same thing. So you had retailers ordering Magic from several different distributors because they were never getting as much as they wanted, okay? And then you had gamers, collectors especially, and speculators, also doing the same thing, ordering in advance Magic from multiple retail stores, right? So, this is called phantom buying, and so this was happening in all tiers of the distribution channel. So we really did, it really looked like the demand for Magic the Gathering for Fallen Empires that we were finally printing to demand. I mean,
right.
It was 6 times the Dark, so maybe we should have, been a little bit more sober. I don't know. Anyway, but we printed too much, and when everybody got what they wanted, they're like, oh shit.
So our friend John is posting in the chat right now that he was one of the people. He ordered 30, hoping he'd get 3 boxes of Fallen Empires. Guess how many boxes showed up, John?
God.
30. Yeah, exactly. So there was a raging debate within the halls of Wizards of the Coast in those days about to what extent should we be managing Magic the Gathering as a collectible versus as a game. And most of the company was, even though they might not say it this way if you ask them, but based on how they acted and talked, they really were leaning more towards managing Magic as a collectible, talking about things like really trying to get really good at anticipating what is the demand and then making like 10% less, and that way the secondary market stays really vibrant and so on and so forth. But there were people, especially Scaff and Richard and myself, who were like, now I had to kind of be convinced by Scaff and Richard to some extent. I was kind of, I was in the middle a lot, like, I don't know. But Richard and Scaff felt that we needed to print enough Magic that players could buy the cards at MSRP. Right. And when you say it that way, that's compelling, right? Because if like we're pricing the booster pack to sell for $250 or whatever, if the players are buying it at $7 or $9 or something like that on day one, well, first of all, how come we're not capturing all that? I mean, if we're okay with these card packs retailing for $7 when they should be $250, how come we're not getting all that money? And really though, we're not okay with that. And so we got to sell enough that the players are able to buy the cards at a price that we think is reasonable for the value that we're offering, and that the price of those cards should stay at that price for several months. I don't know, maybe throughout that block, right? So Magic is in blocks where there's, I don't know how they do it now, but back in the day, they do one big expansion, then 2 smaller expansions over the course of a year, and that's a block, right? So you kind of like all the cards in that block to stay at MSRP throughout that year. So that was what drove us. And I said, well, if we do that, then Magic's no longer a game about speculating, about people trying to buy cards and flip them and make a quick buck. it's about gaming. And then that led us to really think about competition and organized play. So we went through a process of rebranding the company, rebranding Magic the Gathering, and Rick Ahrens, who now runs Pokemon, he was a very key part of this in terms of being the executive that oversaw that happening, and saying, okay, we're going to manage Magic now as a professional sport, as an intellectual sport, and it worked. It worked really, really well. And and the reason I said at the beginning, I'm glad you asked that question, is because I feel like so many times in my career, we got really lucky. I got really lucky. Like, I got really lucky that Richard Garfield designed Magic the Gathering. I got really lucky that Ishihara brought us Pokemon so we could sell it. I got really lucky that TSR just about went bankrupt, and I just happened to have a bunch of money. And
I just happened to have a bunch of money.
That's all really lucky, or luck built on luck, And this, I think, rebranding Magic as an organized play brand was one time where we were really smart. Mm-hmm. And I'm really proud of that. If anything that I've done in my career, it wasn't my idea. I just was thankfully picked the right side of the internal discussion about what we should do, and it was really good.
And I'm pretty sure I understand the reason behind this. Obviously, it's to sell more cards, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. Rands is asking, the initiatives like Type 1, Type 2, and the rotations in and out, were that part and parcel with that thinking?
You're talking about like tournament structures.
Yeah, you Type 1 play, Type 2 play. Type 1 was basically everything.
Yeah. Well, I think that this was another part of catering more to the gamer than the collector. And the collectors are important, and I don't know what WotC's official line is. I want to remind anybody watching, I have nothing to do with WotC anymore. I mean, I love WotC, I love Magic, but I'm not involved. So I can't speak for anything about corporate positioning and strategies and priorities, since 2001. So, but when I was running Wizard of the Coast, we wouldn't say it very publicly, but we were kind of like, we like the collectors, but we like the gamers more. And this is first a game, then a collectible. I mean, you could run it either way. What's bad is if you pretend, if you don't know, which is more important. As a business, you want to make sure you know what's more important to you, even if you never really say it outside the halls of the company, right? So to us, the gamer was more important than the collector. And so if the gamer is more important, then you really want to be able to focus the competition, the competitive play, on the cards that most gamers can get at a reasonable price.
What was the argument that people were making in favor of the collectors? In those initial conversations when it was, do we want to do this for the collectors or do we want to do this for the gamers? What was their argument?
Okay. I'm just so tempted to be snarky right now. I think the people who had the least amount of confidence in Magic as a game were naturally more interested in running the business as a collectible.
Interesting. And that's sort of interesting, though, because unless the game is successful and has legs, then the collectability of a game is sort of voided. No one's going to collect. No one cares about Action Comics #1 if Superman wasn't successful. Yeah. As a readable comic, as a character that was built up in a way where people wanted to stay with it. Right. So if Magic had tanked, i.e. the gamers didn't want to buy it, well, then the secondary market becomes moot because who cares about this rare card for a game that nobody gives a crap about. Obviously, that's not how it turned out.
For sure. You got to take care of the game first because the collecting is really built on the game being popular in the first place, and if it's not, then but the collecting does fuel the popularity of the game too. I mean, there is an argument there that's like, okay, especially Brian, if you think of yourself if you're not a gamer, if you don't play these types of games and you're just coming in and looking as a cold analytical Harvard MBA sort of business guy or gal, and you're looking at this Magic business and go, you might not be convinced that these gamers think, oh, the game's most important. You might not. You're like, maybe they're not maybe the game's not as important as they think it is. That's fair. It's fair to say that, but they're wrong.
Someone in the chat was asking about what you see as the biggest threat, in your opinion, facing Magic the Gathering over the next 30 years.
And this is as almost an outside, you know?
Yeah.
Like what I guess that the question is asking how you felt it got to 30 years to begin with, and then what would make it
not get to 30,
not
not
last
get to 60.
for another 30.
Well, I suppose, I said earlier that we assumed at the beginning that Magic would not be the best trading card game. That our first effort would fundamentally be flawed in some way.
Right.
Which is actually, knowing what I know about games now, I can see that there's a bit of a fallacy there, because there's a lot of game categories where early, Dungeons and Dragons, I mean, of course, it's gone through multiple revisions and additions, but
Sure.
there is a lot, that can be said about somebody in diplomacy. Nobody's ever redone diplomacy and had to be better than diplomacy was, right? I mean,
Right.
So I think that, I guess one threat would be if somebody really does design a better game than Magic. That's a trading card game. I don't know. And the other, I guess, is if somehow electronic versions of games become more compelling to some. I don't know.
The funny thing about that, people talk about the risk of electronic games, but here we are playing D&D again, bigger than it's ever been. And whether they play virtually or at the table, they're still playing Dungeons and Dragons.
I mean, my active career as a publisher is the 90s. And throughout the 90s, there was a common point of discussion about the threat of video games to tabletop games seemed real and huge and credible. And we would have these sort of philosophical thing like, well, but there's something magical about sitting around a table in the shared space and looking at each other's and all this stuff like that. And then, and I sure hope that's true. I mean,
I got to tell you, I'm watching the push. I'm watching the push to purely digital, and it will not surprise me someday if Magic only exists in physical space or in digital space.
But that doesn't undercut
its popularity. I know it doesn't undercut
Peter's
popularity.
earlier point. That actually does not negate that the idea that Magic might still be the best game out there for this, because
but if it is, but is it in digital format? Is it though? I don't know.
Well, I don't know, but the modes in which we play these games do not necessarily affect the game themselves, or affect whether it's still a good game or not. D&D played virtually using a virtual tabletop or electronic dice. It's still at its core D&D. You still have a dungeon master, you still have players, you're still telling stories. All you're doing is using different tools. Hell, there's an electronic dice roller in 1980, whatever it was, that little thing you could order out of Dragon Magazine. That was kind of worked. Kind of worked. So whether Magic goes totally virtual, I mean, I'm sure there are lots of people who don't want to see that. The game is still the game, and as the tech improves to handle things like economy and everything else differently, it'll be whatever it is.
So like I've doubled down. I have doubled down on believing. I've drank the Kool-Aid that people really want to get together and play face to face. I mean,
and I think that's ultimately
I run a
true.
convention for a business now.
Yes, you do.
Yeah, and so I think hopefully that trend lasts at least as long as I'm alive. Okay.
But I actually don't think that trend's going away.
Yeah. I think that we've certainly discovered that we can game effectively over Zoom and Roll20 and great, and lots of people like to do that. And there are some people that prefer it. And what's great is that now there are people who can enjoy our hobby of tabletop games in what is to them a safer space. At home, maybe they don't like crowds, maybe they just want to be able to put somebody on mute, and so that's good. Thankfully, there's a lot of people that want to do it face to face too. I'm so sick of playing over Zoom. I gotta tell you, I am.
Oh, funny.
I am just like I'm still doing it for Table Takes game night, but it's like pulling teeth to get me to play a game on Zoom now.
It's interesting. Like I started majorly playing D&D during the pandemic with the play group that we have, and a really good play group. We mesh really well. If they were nearby, I would totally play with them in person. But literally, one's in Florida, one's in the UK,
and one's in Seattle.
One's in Seattle, actually, and then Seth and I, and so in DC. So it's it's amazing that I get to play with these people from all over the place, and I really love that about doing the online gaming. But I would definitely, if they were next door, I would definitely like to see them in person instead. I think.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think that what I found interesting was I had started, like Kelly did, I'd started up a virtual table during COVID.
Yeah.
When GaryCon of this year, 2022, rolled around, we all decided, okay, we're going to go back to GaryCon. We skipped a year because of COVID, and we skipped the virtual thing. But 2022, we all feel pretty comfortable with this. Let's go back. That was the first time in 2 years of gaming together, we gamed together at a table. And the difference, it was there. There was
palpable.
A different feel. Yeah.
Palpable.
And we still love that the fact that it lets us play the virtual lets us still play together. Some are in Texas, one guy's in Alaska. We're all over the place. We like that it allows us to do that, but what we realized, what it really hammered home was how valuable that face-to-face, sitting at the table, just hanging out, social component is.
Well, you can communicate more fully because you're communicating with your whole body. You're communicating with your body language. You're able to see other people's body language. You're able to tell when you're competing for the mic a little bit on Zoom calls can be it's, I don't know. Anyway, I mean, it's great. I'm glad people. I mean, if
it's a tool.
If I didn't have amazing people I could play with here in Seattle, then I'd be playing on Zoom, sure, but.
Yeah, of course.
I submit to you, you have never experienced a Zoom role-playing game until you've played with 4 ADHD people and 1 non-ADHD person, trying to keep them focused on the task at hand over Zoom.
Yeah.
So another interesting question that just came through is from Rands was about 90s Magic was such an influential game, but didn't make any real attempt to grow into broader IP except comic books and some toys, etc. Was there ever any attempts to do anything like an MTG movie or TV show when you were handling Magic the Gathering? Was there a thought of going into IP like that then?
Right. First of all, I'll say hi, Rands.
Oh, Rands, right?
Yeah. So. Yeah, I mean, we did talk about it. We even had a guy on staff whose job it was to go out and hunt for possibilities and write business plans and kind of analyze what we could do. And, the film business was kind of the same back in those days. Like, if you're willing to pay for it, sure. If you're willing to pay for all the production costs of creating a movie or a TV series of some sort, then then it's a lot easier to get it done. But then finding a producer to do that sort of game, the challenge was that when it comes to creating a film or media product like a movie or TV series off of an intellectual property, it's a lot easier. I mean, a lot of the economic upside for a producer and their ergo a licensing agent is the merchandising, and merchandising is strongest in sports and children's products. It's it's not as strong in geeky. The range of stuff that, at least in the 90s, now this might be changing, but the range of stuff that somebody who is a D&D fan is interested in buying outside of the obvious licenses, like a video game license, which we were getting those licenses anyway. I mean, so a TV series isn't going to really help us get a video game license when we already had, BioWare and people doing video games. I mean, okay, maybe a bigger one or whatever. But since if you can't do plush and action figures and a lot of apparel choices and stuff like that, it's harder to have the licensing upside, and ergo harder to get a producer, because that's how the producer licensing agent combination is where the money is for a lot of these. So we tried, but it
was also such a different environment. I mean, I remember in the 80s, you know, the idea today that comic books would not make good movies is like completely implausible. But back in the 80s, when the head of Marvel Productions, which was producing the G.I. Joe cartoon, the Transformers cartoon, she tried to pitch networks on a comic book cartoon relating to any of, say, the Marvel properties. They all said no.
Yeah.
It was common wisdom. And I think by the 90s, we were still in a state where things that are part of geek culture, or whatever you want to call it, weren't seen as slam dunks, weren't seen as no-brainers. So you're going up a much bigger stigma than I think today.
Well,
where
and
today
we
seems
also
like nothing.
Yeah, I mean, we also at Wizard of the Coast, then, I don't know about now, but then we didn't have the DNA within the company to know how to go out and exploit our brands into media. I mean, it just wasn't something a competency, and we were just still trying to figure out how to print enough cards and get them distributed correctly, and rolling out the organized play program, and then, buying TSR. I mean, we had, the things that we did do took a lot of time.
And you did them
well. I mean, you're a game company. You know what I mean? Like, it's fair to focus on the games.
Yeah.
I've always wondered, given your love of role-playing games, and given that you started as a role-playing game publisher, do you ever kind of look back and say, like, man, I sort of wish we had hit with, like, a role-playing game instead of Magic? Like, would that have been something you would have found personally fulfilling in a different way?
I mean, if I didn't know what I was missing, I probably would have, right?
Right. Well.
I'm really happy to hit with Magic.
It's a weird question, I realize.
Yeah. No, I mean, we started doing role-playing products, and we were really happy doing that. But I came to, there's a point, I mean, really one of the sad points of WotC history, certainly for me personally, was coming to the realization that the role-playing games we were doing, this is pre-Dungeons and Dragons, were not a good use of company resources and not a good use of bandwidth of the smart people in the company, and so we got out of the category, and when we got out, I told, I don't know who, but I remember saying it, and somebody remembers me saying it, that until we have the first or second best game in role-playing, we're not going to be in this category. And then eventually we got the chance to buy D&D. So that's when we got back into it. So, but I'm really happy the way it turned. I mean,
obviously you're happy with Magic.
As it turned out, we got the best game of all time in the role-playing category eventually. So, hey, it's all good.
How did that feel for you? Again, given like your interest in history, like, oh, hey, here's your chance to buy D&D. What goes through your mind when you contemplate the idea that I'm gonna own Dungeons and Dragons, or your company's gonna own Dungeons and Dragons?
It's crazy. I mean, it was so insane. Just like kid from a farm first publishing Magic, and then getting a chance to buy D&D and dress it up. That was yeah. I mean, the day the deal was done and Lorraine came out, I was sitting in a car outside the offices at Lake Geneva, and Lorraine came out and gave me the keys, through the window. Hey, Peter, congratulations, here's the keys. I'm sitting there, thanks, keys to the office.
Is that really what happened? Is that really how it
happened?
That's amazing.
That's amazing.
All right, so we're putting this little thing in the film now, right? Like,
I was just sitting in the car. I mean, like, I tried to figure out what to do, and I don't remember if she told me, like, drive up and wait in the driveway and I'll bring you I don't remember that part of it, but she must have, or her secretary did.
A legacy. Here you go.
Yeah. Do they still have the fleet of company cars when you bought it? Was that still in play?
No,
that had all gone?
That's a decade earlier, at least. Decade, maybe two.
All gone.
Yeah. No, so she brought out the keys, and Lorraine was, and we exchanged nice words, polite, professional, and gave me the keys, and then she left, and I just sat there and cried for a while, and then eventually went inside.
I can't imagine.
Was anybody with you? Was it just you sitting alone in the car?
I was sitting alone in the car.
Wow.
Yeah, and gets the keys, like, okay, wow. Now I own this company, or my company is, and like it was so heady because it is a part of history. I mean, it's such an amazing, interesting part of history. I mean, the history of Magic relies on the history of D&D. Richard the Garfield.
He is the Garfield.
That's why I'm going to call him Richard the Garfield. He, always credited D&D as hugely important, and even said at one time that he thought D&D was a bigger design accomplishment in terms of if you measure the design as a jump up from what existed before, right. In a game, that D&D was the greatest game ever. And so, I mean, all that legacy and history is sitting there right there in this office, and yeah.
So when you bought it, did you ever contemplate the fact that there would be, and now today, there are at least 2 Dungeons & Dragons Magic the Gathering sets floating around?
Oh, I contemplated that. That was on a pitch I made to my board of directors at the time.
So why did it happen?
Okay. I'll tell you. It's not a long story. I can tell you. It's pretty easy. It's pretty straightforward. So, yes, to buy TSR, of course, a lot of the stories that get told about this are focusing, rightfully so, on the dynamics between Lorraine and myself and Ryan Dancy and Bob Ramowitz and the Five Rings deal and how it all came together, and then just some of the stuff like that. But I also had to present the business case to my board of directors, and say, hey, we got a whole bunch of money in the bank, and I want to spend all of it. And the company, and there was a very strong argument to not do it then, which was there were certainly, more of those Harvard MBA types, but my colleagues, people trying to give me good advice, saying, hey, Peter, just let the company go into bankruptcy. We'll buy it later, pennies on the dollar, and, so of course I did not want that to happen because of the disruption to the brand and whether you get the whole company or just get part of it, blah, 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 blah. And so, I fully, beat my chest and we got it done. But I did, as part of the presentation to the board of why we should do this, was that, oh shit, what was the question? Oh, I know, Magic.
Yeah. Magic, yeah.
Yes, crossover
Magic
sets.
expansions.
Yeah, pretty soon. I'm just waiting for that day. D tells me, Peter, perhaps it's time to withdraw from public life. Okay, climbed out of it. Okay, yes, Magic expansions. Yeah, so I told the board, I said, listen, there's synergies here. We can do crossover products between these 2 great brands. We can do a role-playing game set in Dominaria. We can do Magic expansions set, in the based around the different campaign settings of TSR, and there's a whole bunch of them. Blah 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 blah. The board's like, oh, okay, sounds good, sure, because they don't know any better. And then we buy TSR, and nobody on the Magic team wanted anything to do with doing a Dungeons and Dragons Magic expansion, and nobody on the D&D team wanted anything to do with a campaign setting set in Dominaria. And so. I was just ahead of my time, I guess. Now it's happening and it's fabulous, right? But at the time, it was like, oh yeah, I wanted to do that from day one. In fact, before the deal was done, Jonathan Tweed will tell you, he was working on a design for a Dominaria RPG D&D type thing.
So you will be absolutely pleased to know that when this stream ends shortly, I'm going to have some dinner, and then in about 45 minutes, I will be launching another stream that is my stream D&D game, and we will be playing a Strixhaven, which is a Magic the Gathering game. That is happening tonight.
Awesome.
And every Monday night. And we're playing Dungeons and Dragons in a Magic the Gathering designed world.
Okay, do I have time to ask you a question about that?
You do.
I don't know. What time is it anyway? Here.
We got 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay.
Okay. So in your D&D adaptation of Magic the Gathering, what's a planeswalker?
They have not encountered one yet. They may actually be planeswalkers.
Until you get your arms around that issue, you haven't dealt with the real question.
What I'm doing actually is using it as a setting, and I'm allowing it to be an interplanar nexus where they can go to any setting they want, or quite frankly, any setting I want to throw them at.
Planescape?
Yeah, I was gonna say that sounds just like Planescape.
Exactly. Yeah, it does sound exactly like
So what they're going to find out
Yeah.
tonight is, as game opens, is there's a new dock being built for this weird ship.
and what does it mean when you summon a goblin? I mean, like what does it mean when you tap a land? I mean, what does all that mean in a D&D version? Right? That's laugh, but that's the crux of the question. And in my opinion,
It gets weird.
the D&D campaign setting for Magic dodged it and
They
didn't
did.
really give.
No, they
did not
absolutely
give
did.
Did not give a satisfying answer to those questions.
Ah, interesting.
I will agree with you on that one.
Yeah.
How did you feel about
Jonathan,
the
we had good
D&D
ideas.
in Magic, though? So the
Oh
other
my
direction.
God, that was a huge hit. Okay, so yeah, thank you, because now I can perhaps redeem myself to some people that still work there. But the Forgotten Realms Magic expansion that came out is amazing. I couldn't believe it when we played it. John Zinzer down at AEG organized a game for about 20 of us, some of us old friends that hung out
awesome.
together, and his place down in Vegas, and we opened up these packs. None of us had any idea what they were. Most of us, many of us, hadn't played Magic in quite a while. There were like four like real gamers there. Of course, they just kicked our ass. But anyway, what I was so impressed by is that it was a great Magic expansion and great D&D interpretations, great Dungeons and Dragons.
So yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
So good, so
Yeah.
good. That product
And
can
the
only
art-
have been written with a combination, a design team that included people that loved D&D and loved Magic the Gathering, and then yes, Kelly, to put great art on top of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the art was amazing, I thought, for it. Yeah, it was just ridiculous.
Yeah, so I emailed a couple of my board members from 25 years ago and said, I told you there were synergies between these two games.
Just one little tweet or message in their email box. I told you so.
I told you so.
Yeah.
I think that is a perfect place to end.
Peter, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
Thank
you
you
so
for having
much.
me
Joining
on.
us.
So much fun. I love hanging out with you guys, whether we're on the camera or
It
not.
was-
You guys are great. So
It was great
best of
seeing
luck.
you again.
Anybody watching, support the Kickstarter.
Thank you
This
so
is gonna be
much.
great. All right.
We
Thank you.
appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Peter.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll talk soon.
Smile before you sign off because you're going to get frozen in that position when you do. There you go.
Oh God, now he's turning.
Oh, he didn't go.
I thought it had frozen.
He didn't go.
He's really good at it. It's amazing.
Oh, that's funny. All right. On that note, I am going to end the stream. So, Peter, you can hang out with us while we end the stream.
Bye, everyone.
All right.
I'll be
See you
back in an
tomorrow
hour with our
for
D&D
the
game.
Day 2 stream.
And
Take care,
tomorrow
guys.
we'll be streaming. Don't forget to come in tomorrow.
Don't forget to
We're
miss
gonna
us.
Yeah, don't forget to miss. Tomorrow we're gonna have just so many people.
So many people tomorrow. So
Here,
many
I've
here.
got it. Actually,
And again, at 9:00 tonight, we're gonna have the auction for Mark Pool's art from the T-shirt that we have in our Kickstarter. If you want to take a look at what that looks like, you can go to our Kickstarter. It's ignitingthesparkmtg.com. You got a little more than a day left on this thing.
here,
So,
I'm going to put it up
starts
over the
at
middle
9.
of the screen. There's our schedule tomorrow, right there in the middle of the screen. So, noon, Sheldon Menery, 1 o'clock, Melissa DeTora, 5 p.m., Lisa Stevens.
No, you missed one. 1:30, we've got Jimmy Cooney from Dice City Games. I have an updated image.
And I spoke with Dana Fisher's dad, and Dana may be joining us.
I know. Dana Fisher might be joining us, too. Crazy.
And then Tatiana, Brian David Marshall, Tatiana, Gavin Very, Drill Treat, Liz Danforth, Jesper Meerforce, and Matt
Jesper's gonna be
Tabak.
on.
it's gonna be a fun day. Cool.
All right, let us call it, my friends. We will see everyone. Thank you again, Peter.
Have a good night, all.
Everybody wave goodbye.